The 20th century was the century of the redistribution of wealth. The 21st century will be the century of the redistribution of work. The 20th century was the century of the reduction of inequality of income. The 21st century will be the century of the reduction of inequality of leisure, of the time we have to do what we want to do. Today, many people, especially retired people, have unlimited free time, whereas younger people who have jobs and children feel stressed for time. This is inequitable, and it is also suboptimal. Why should we cram the work of our lives into the decades when we can have and care for children, and get decades of enforced leisure when our children no longer need us so much? The revolution in life expectancy is going to propel the revolution in the redistribution of work. As we live longer and longer healthy, we are going to want to spend the time of our lives differently, mixing education, work, and leisure more evenly across our lives. So let me begin by briefly reviewing what has been discovered about the longevity revolution. There are three main views about longevity. The first, which is due to Aristotle, 350 BC, and is the most common view even today, is that we have limited lifespans. Aristotle said there were two kinds of death. You could die prematurely because of an accident, a war, a famine, epidemic, or you could die at the end of your natural lifespan. And as Leonard Hayflick put it, there's one and only one cause of death at older ages, and that's old age. And nothing can be done about old age. That's the first view. The second view is, yes, that's true unless you know the secrets. And if you know the secret of longevity, you can live longer than your natural lifespan. And the first major book on this was written in the early 16th century by Luigi Canaro, a Venetian nobleman, and he wrote a book about the secret of living long. It was the bestseller in Europe for 3 centuries after the Bible. What's the secret of living long? Dietary restriction, severe dietary restriction. And this is still a popular idea today, not proven by any means. Canaro wrote this book when he said he was 50, and then he wrote additional editions of the book every 5 or 10 years thereafter. And every time he came out with a new edition, if the new edition came out after 10 years, he was 20 years older. So he lived a very long time, at least by suffering dietary restriction. It seemed that life was exceptionally long. Anyway, there are other secrets of longevity. Drink a lot of red wine, have tomatoes for breakfast, have 2 long-lived parents, so there's some gene that helps you live long. Have sex with young virgins. There's a whole series of hypotheses about how to live long. But none of these hypotheses have been proven true. There's no secret of longevity that's been discovered yet, except you should take good care of yourself. So the third view is that the frontier of survival is advancing, and that we're making progress in living longer, and something can be done about old age. The trouble with this third theory, up until 20 years ago, was there was no evidence in favor of it. There was no data that we had about how long older people were living. So I advanced this theory in 1979 and said, how are we going to test this theory? So I journeyed to Stockholm, and I went to Statistics Sweden, and I met Hans Lönnström, and he took me to the basement of Statistics Sweden. All of these very accurate records of when Swedes were born and when they died. But none of the data after age 85 had been computerized, so nobody knew what was happening after age 85. So Hans Lönnström volunteered to computerize the data. He spent weekends and evenings doing this for 3 years, and finally we had some data on what was happening to mortality after age 85. And here's the results. So the risk of death from 1900 up until 1990 when he did this. There's age 85. And up until 1950, very little could be done. But after 1950, there was a dramatic reduction, a halving of death rates at age 85. And here's age 90, and here's age 95. So you can see it's not true that nothing can be done about death at older ages. An enormous amount can be done to reduce mortality among the very old. And this is subsequently, so Hans Lundstrom and I published this in 1992, and it's subsequently been replicated for many countries, many, many countries. I'll just give you one other example. This is Japan, Japanese females, Japanese men, age 85, 90, 95. And you can see, since 1950, you can see the dramatic reduction in mortality at these ages, both for men and for women. Men have higher death rates, but still dramatic progress, and no sign at all of any leveling off. Steady progress. Now, it's relatively easy to live to 80. It's hard to live from 80 to 100. So the progress in bringing death rates down after age 80 has resulted in an explosion of centenarians. Let me show you the data for Sweden. This is amazing. 1 or 2 centenarians each year at the end of the 19th century, then starting to go up, and particularly after 1975, almost vertical rise in the number of centenarians. Still a small number, but an enormous increase from nobody in many years to, as you can see, thousands of people today. Now I'll show you, the Japanese are doing even better than the Swedes. So Japanese semi-super centenarians, these are people who are 105 years old and older. So 105 years old and older in Japan. This is a revolution. You see, nobody at all, and then almost a vertical rise. So the progress in bringing death rates down is fundamentally changing longevity. The frontier of survival is advancing, not because we're slowing down the pace of aging, not because we're aging more slowly. The frontier of survival is advancing because we're postponing aging to higher and higher ages. So let me show you Swedish data on this. Here's Swedish females from 30 to 90. On the vertical axis, the risk of death on a logarithmic scale. So 1 in the 10,000, 1 in the 1,000, 1 in the 100, 1 in 10. And then from age 30 to age 90. Here's Swedish females in 1950. And these are Swedish data, so these are very, very accurate. This is the truth. Okay. And here's Swedish females in 1980. And here's Swedish females in 2010. So you can see the curve is shifting over. You can think about it coming down, but it's shifting over, shifting out to higher ages. And to see that, you could look at the age when you have a 1% chance of death. You might think of that as when you should start worrying about death a little bit. You have a 1% chance of death. In 1950, it was age 57. This is Swedish females. In 1980, it was 63. And in 2010, it's 68. So 68 is the new 57. And there's a lot of data that says, not only in terms of death rates, but also in terms of fundamental questions of health, whether you can take care of yourself, can you engage in the activities of daily living. There's been a similar kind of shift, so that older people, there's been about a 10-year shift in aging over the last 50 or 60 years, where people 10 years older is just as healthy as people were 10 years younger, 50 years ago. So the next important point here is that the frontier of survival, this advancing frontier of survival, is part of a bigger life expectancy revolution. And so I want to tell you a little about this long-term longevity revolution. So here's life expectancy in years from 45 to 95, and then year from 1840 until the present. And in 1840, Swedish women had the world's longest life expectancy. Even though Sweden at the time was a poor country, Swedish women had the world's longest life expectancy. What was it? 45. 45. Then, since 1840, other countries became the record holder. So you can see these other countries, Norway, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. And then recently, Japan. So today, it's Japanese women who have the world's longest life expectancy, 86 and a half. So since 1840 until now, we've gone from 45 to 86 and a half. And you can see it's a remarkably straight line trend. It doesn't get much more straight than that. And the slope of the line is 2.5 years per decade, which is 3 months per year, which is 6 hours per day. Right? You know, 2.5 years per decade, but 6 hours per day, that's exciting. But it's the same number. It's 6 hours per day. Everybody, well, this is at birth. It turns out that at age 65, it's almost as fast. So everybody in this room, on average, is gaining something like 6 hours per day of additional life expectancy every day. Isn't that wonderful? Okay, now, so here's Germany. So Germany in 1900 had lower life expectancy than Sweden had in 1840. Germany in 1900 had a life expectancy under 45. And then it started to catch up. And then World War I, the Spanish flu. Okay, but no memory. Right after 1920, look, right on the line again. Then World War II, terrible disaster. But by 1950, right on the line again. So what's important for mortality is what's happening now. There's very little memory of the past. It's what's going on now that determines life expectancy. And this is Germany. I want to show you Sweden as well. So Sweden was the world's leader. Then it fell behind. Then it caught up. It was the world's leader again. And then more recently, it's fallen a little bit behind. But it's the same basic trend. So the straight line doesn't hold exactly for all countries, but the straight line holds approximately for the advanced countries like Sweden and Japan and Germany and the United States and France and so on. Now, if you take this long-term trend since 1840 and you project it forward, or if you take the data for individual countries and project them forward, and you take into account the fact that life expectancy is going up by 2.5 years per decade, you can make projections about the future, assuming that the next 100 years will be like the last couple hundred years. And if you do that, we can take the year of birth, and we can ask, what percentage of children born that year what's the age such that 50% of the children born that year will still be alive? What's the age that children can hope to reach? What do you think? Well, for children born in Sweden in the year 2000, this is boys and girls together, 50%, if trends continue, will reach the age of 101. No miracles, just the continuation of the trend of the last 200 years. Children born in 2005, 102. And children born in 2010, 104. So it's very long lives are not the distant privilege of remote future generations. Very long lives are the likely destiny of children alive today. Now, this is uncertain, of course, because you can't predict the future with accuracy. There may be terrible things that happen that reduce life expectancy, but if the trend over the last 200 years continues, this is true. Now, if you knew you were going to probably live 100 years or more, how would you want to arrange your life? It seems to me you would not want to arrange the life the way we do. So let me give you some data and then talk a little bit about redistributing work over the course of life. So I live in Denmark, so I had access to the most recent Danish data, so I'm going to show you Denmark. So I'm sorry, before I get into that, I'm going to show you some other numbers about different countries. Then I'm going to talk about Denmark. So here, how many of us work and how much do we work? This is data on several countries. So one interesting statistic is how many people work compared to the people who don't work. And in Germany, in 2009, the most recent year for which we have good data from the Labor Office, there were 1.13 people who didn't work for every one person who did work. So every person who worked had to support somebody who didn't work. In 2025, if you project this forward and keep current working patterns the same, there'll be 3 non-workers for every 2 workers. And this will be a 30% increase in the burden on workers. It's like a 30% increase in taxes. How many hours per week do people work? So you take the whole population of Germany, you find out the total number of hours worked, you divide by the population, that's the average per week, and then that's the average number of hours worked per week. So how hard do Germans work? I work in Germany part-time. Germans work very hard, huh? Yeah, they work very, very hard. They work 12 and a half hours a week. Now, how is that possible? That's because so many Germans don't work. And in 2025, if the trends continue, they'll work 11 hours per week. And that's a 11% change. It's like an 11% increase in the unemployment rate. Raise the unemployment rate by 11 points. And here's some other countries. Let's look at hours worked per week, per capita. In Germany, it's 12.55. In France, it's 12.45. So the Germans were happy to hear this. They work a little harder than the French. But the Germans do not work as hard as the Italians. Of course, we're not sure about the Italian data, but this is the official data. And then the Germans don't work as hard as the British. And the Germans don't work anywhere near as hard as the Americans. So you can see these patterns. But in all cases, except for the United States, there's going to be a negative change over the next few years, so that there'll be a heavier and heavier burden on younger people if there's not a reform of labor markets. The United States is different because the United States has high fertility, the United States has lots of in-migration, and the United States has low life expectancy. So these 3 things help reduce the number of older people compared to the number of younger people. Now let me turn to Denmark. Oh, no, see, I have one other thing I want to show you first. Sorry, I'm going to get to Denmark in a minute. So here's the percentage working by age in Germany. So you can see, even at age 40, only about 65% of people work. A lot of people don't work in Germany. It's better in Sweden. And here's what what it should look like. This is where I think Sweden would like to go, where Denmark would like to go, that 90% of people work during the working ages, and more people work after 60 and after 65 than do today. So suppose we can move from this current pattern to the pattern we have more workforce participation. Then, here's how many hours people work by age in Germany again. And you can see even at age 40, it's only a little more than 30 hours, again, because so many people don't work. But if we did what I just showed you, if we moved from the red curve to the blue curve, then we could reduce this to this. So we could cut the green area, but we'd add the blue area. So we could have a situation where the actual hours worked per week per capita was cut to 25. So this is my 25 hours per week claim that we could do this. And now I'm going to turn to the Danish data, and I want to show you how we can do this. So how much do Danes work? Now, of course, Danes don't work as much as Swedes, but almost as much as Swedes. So last year in Denmark, the Danish people altogether worked 3.8 billion hours. Okay. And there were 5.6 million people. So if you divide the one number by the other number, you get the amount of work per person. 13 hours per week per capita. How can it be true? Well, only 2.6 million people worked, so that's 47%, less than half. And the people who worked, they worked 28 hours per week per worker. Well, that's more reasonable, but still, only 28 hours. How can you get 28 hours? So here. The usual work week in Denmark is 37 hours per week. But you have 5 weeks of vacation, and you have Christmas and New Year's and Danish Constitution Day and All Saints Day and all sorts of holidays. And then people sometimes get sick or their children get sick and they take time off. So because of all that, the actual number of hours that full-time workers work per week on average is 31 or 32, between 31 and 32. And some people work part-time. And if you take those part-time people into account, then you get the 28 hours per week that I just showed you. Okay? Now, so let's just summarize. Danes currently work 13 hours per week per capita. So this goes to show, this demonstrates that there's enormous potential for the redistribution of work. If people only work 13 hours per week per capita, we can spread this around more evenly without too much trouble. Is that work? When you think about a week, how long a week is, 7 days, 24 hours a day, and you're only working 13 hours, you're working a little bit more than half a day out of a week, It's our tithe. We used to give 10% to the church, now we give 10% to work. But it's a very small part of our lives, on average. Of course, for young people who have children, who have to work and take care of their children, and are trying to make a career, and are working full time, of course it's a burden. But on average, across the whole population, it's only 13 hours. Now, so 47% worked, and those who actually worked 28 hours per week per capita. So, suppose we could get 5% more Danes to work. Suppose people my age worked, like I do. We get 5% more people to work. What could be done? Well, you could reduce the actual work week to 25 hours per person, per worker, per capita. So 25 hours per week per worker. So it's this notion of a 25-hour work week is not something that's fantastic, not something that's impossible. All Denmark has to do is get 5% more people working. Now, this 25 hours per week per worker, that's actual work done. And the official work week, of course, is higher. So the official work week would be cut from 37 to 33. But then, as I explained to you before, because of vacations and holidays and sick time, that gets cut down. And then because some people work part-time, it gets cut down to 25. So the actual work week is 25, and the official work week could be cut to 33. Now, when we think about this, at least the younger people in the room might think it's a good idea that people would work less when they're younger, work fewer hours per week. They would keep on working when they were older, but at a lower number of hours per week. There'd be more part-time work. And people would stay in the labor market longer, so that more people would work, but they would work fewer hours per week. And this would have, I think, several big advantages. First, young people would have more time to have children and to take care of children. Younger people would have more time to continue their educations. Younger people would have more time to enjoy some leisure. Older people would continue to contribute to society. Older people, they do today in many ways, taking care of grandchildren, for example, volunteer work, but they would contribute more actively to society. And older people, by staying in the labor force, at least part-time, would not only contribute to society, they would reduce taxes because they don't get so much pensions because they're working. So they would lower taxes for everybody. And they would be healthier. There's strong evidence that people who work are healthier than people who don't work. This is not universal. There are people who can't work anymore, people who are sick, people who are worn out from work. There are people who just simply who can't work. They're not able to work. And the people who do work tend to be healthier than the people who can't work. But other things being equal, it turns out that if you work, you're likely to be healthier and happier than if you don't work. Maybe not full-time, maybe half-time, but stay in the labor market. So I see a reform where gradually the system would change so that more people are in the labor force, and the people who are in the labor force would work fewer hours per week. And I think this redistribution of work would be of great benefit to the entire society. So, to conclude, I'm not a politician, I'm a scientist. but I have some political ideas. But the work that I described to you has been published in good journals. And you can read about this if you'd like. This has been peer-reviewed work, Science, Nature, The Lancet, and so on. And so it's not some speculative idea. And I think when our children, our grandchildren look back on us, they'll say, why in earth did they arrange the time of their lives the way they did it? Why did they squeeze all the work into the years when they could enjoy their children and then have decades of leisure when their children didn't want to see them anymore? It's crazy, absolutely crazy. And it's not good for older people, it's not good for younger people. So my conclusion is the 21st century will be the century of the redistribution of work. Thank you.